Hello and well met. This is Laren with the Fantasy Grounds Academy. Today I'm going to speak about grids and maps that you might find randomly on the internet. Some of the things that you might come across when you start using Fantasy Grounds, and you'll realize that it can be a real bummer. So up on the screen right now, I have a map that I downloaded from the D&D Beyond website through my account. So I'll bring that up real shortly and I will show you what this is. So essentially, this is a free adventure that I was trying to convert into Fantasy Grounds. And I do this to practice and also to have the content available. So the map here is for the new heist that was released for free, or at least on the D&D Beyond website. So this is a big, huge map to start with. So that's something that you'll have to consider when you're doing these types of conversions or creating content. Is this map's a little overkill for virtual tabletop? It's kind of large. Also, remember when you download content from the internet like this, it could be compressed and resized so that when someone's using their mobile phone, it'll display properly. It won't be out distorted. That's another issue that can happen. So what happens is all these little squares, they start becoming rectangles or trapezoids or whatever they end up as. So when you import it into Fantasy Grounds, this is what you'll end up getting technically is when you try to put a grid on it, this is a Fantasy Grounds grid on top of the grid that was already painted on there. So you might actually be able to get it close here, but then when you actually go to the other side of the map, you might see something like this where it's way off. And that's typical what you'll find when you grab stuff from unknown sources or you're taking photos that weren't really meant to be distributed. So my advice there is generally to try to find maps that are actually being sold or distributed for virtual tabletop, and maybe they don't already have the grid baked into them. That's very helpful in the beginning. However, realize that everyone has a lot of money and they're just kind of needing a map to throw into Fantasy Grounds to run their game. So one of the things that you can do is first bring it into your virtual tabletop, throw a grid on it, see if it lines up. If it doesn't, you can unlock the image and try to play around with the grid settings. You can actually take the aspect ratio, the lock, you can take that off and kind of play around with, you kind of make them triangular, or not triangular, but rectangular to fit the map. But usually that it doesn't end well, and it's really frustrating. And one of the real key things here is understanding what the source is. So when you grab a random map, it's probably not going to be square. The quality is going to be questionable. You're probably not going to know the dimensions. The other thing is if you import it into a third-party program to edit it, and if you end up stretching it in any way or changing the size, it's going to change the grids as well, which is going to make those distorted. So whenever you mess with the map, whether you upload it to a website or you try to change it in a program, if you don't leave the original dimensions, it will distort these and probably cause you problems in Fantasy Grounds trying to line it up. So there is a solution, at least one solution, and that is a third-party tool called MapAlign. Now this isn't new. This thing's been out since 2013. It is workable. I don't think it's usable on a Mac or Unix, but it is for PC. But essentially, you can use the program to straighten out maps. It basically kind of stretches it so the map fits a real grid. So this is what you'll get when you first start loading maps in, especially when they're not really made for virtual tabletop. So like maps, like they come from like Wizards of the Coast and such, they're more made for print or more artistic than they are technical. So they don't generally make these for virtual tabletops. They do put out some things, but not too much. Other rule sets do a lot better job with this. But nonetheless, when you just grab a random map on Pinterest or wherever you're getting them from, you have no idea what you're getting as far as, if the map's distorted, if it's square, or perfectly rectangular. It's really hard to tell. So when you first get a map, throw it in the Fantasy Grounds, if you start seeing a bunch of this, you can probably assume that it's likely not square. So that means that somehow it's been distorted, or someone's edited or something, and it's changed the original layout. So this even says that one square is 5 feet down here on the scale. But well, when you go down here, all these squares are off. So there is a solution for this, other than playing around with this, the actual settings. You can actually end up with something like this if you use a tool like MapAlign. So I went through and restretched a map, and it actually came out better. And it's not 100% perfect. It's like 99.5%. It's a little teeny bit off, but it's closer than what you would get if when you actually grab a random map. So I'm going to bring up this program. It's a free program on the Fantasy Grounds forums. So if you go to the forums, or you go to Google and search for MapAlign plus Fantasy Grounds, it'll take you to a thread. And the very first thread was posted here by Valeros. Very helpful tool. And his statement is he found it tedious to get maps to line up with the grid, especially Wizard of the Coast maps. So I made a utility to do it quickly. It works great for Fantasy Grounds and Roll20. It's also good for adding a grid on a map that doesn't already have one. So there's directions in the actual software, and it's really not that complex once you start using it. And down here is a link to a video that Zacchaeus made to help you kind of explain how it works. And then there's two different versions. There's an older version, and then there's a large address aware, which allows you to load bigger maps. So those are the two variations. So this is an old tool that's been around for a while. But if you're new to Fantasy Grounds and you're frustrated and pissed off about maps, this might help you with that. So I have the MapAlign tool installed. It is a zip file. There was some complaint that some antiviruses considered it to be a threat, which, I'm not going to tell you to install it, but I haven't had any problems with it. But nonetheless, this tool is useful for when you have maps that are really pesky and you need to get them fixed or adjusted for your game. So I'm going to go ahead and maximize this. So what you're going to get here are different scales and ways to adjust the maps. You can do background colors. There's some pretty interesting things. But what I'm going to do is bring in that map that I worked on initially, just so you can kind of get a feel for how this works. So basically, once you have it installed and you know where your map resides, you go to Open, and I'm going to take this DM's player map, which is the main map that you're going to be using, and open this up in the program. So you have a way to scale the map. You can use the mouse wheel, but you want to be careful is once you get beyond 800 in percentage, it gets very laggy. So when you're zooming in on a map, if you have to go greater than 800 or 800%, that's crazy. But if you use your mouse wheel, you can change that. But you got to be careful with that, because if you go to 1600, it will actually kind of freeze. It gets too big, or something happens where the memory gets too much, and then it kind of lags. But I think around 400 to 800% for zoom level is pretty good. So when you're getting ready to draw a square, you want this zoomed in as far as you can without creating that problem. So 800% is probably the maximum that you want to do. And see, I can see this square right here. So what you're going to do is define the square you want to work with. And what you like to do ideally is to start in one corner or the other of the map. It doesn't matter which corner, but work from that corner out. So in other words, you start in the corner and then you start stretching the map from that corner. And when I say that corner, I'm talking, oops, see, there it is. I actually went beyond 180% because I use the mouse wheel. So I want to see now it says not responding. So that's because this zoom level is way too much for it. So like I said, 800% is probably the max. So what I was saying before is that when you are going to zoom in and out, you want to work within one of the corners. So It can be the left or the right, the bottom right, bottom left, but that's basically where you want to start. So I'm going to start over here on this island where the square is, and I'm going to zoom in to 800%. And then you have these navigation sliders where you can actually slide the map back and forth. I kept trying to use my mouse wheel because of Fantasy Grounds, but you use these side things on the bottom, you can actually move these around. So now that I have this up, I'm going to trace by left clicking and dragging until you can get as close as you can. So as you can see, there's kind of a center point here. So I want to click on this little, there's a little tiny speck here that I'm going to click on. And I'm going to left click and drag for this. You see this blue square? And I'm going to try to get this lined up in the center as best as possible, and then let go. And what you'll see is the grid will form. And yeah, I did it again. I zoomed in to 1600. So be careful with the middle mouse wheel. That's my my advice. I've done this like 50,000 times. It drives me nuts. So be careful with the zoom level. Okay, so back to 800%. All right, so basically, let me use this instead of the mouse wheel because I'll go the wrong direction. So this, what you'll start seeing is you'll notice that all these different squares don't line up. The other thing you want to consider is the output size. So the default is 70 pixels per inch. If you really want this to work and you don't want the map to be hurting, because right now, if I exported this map, it's at 60 by or 6,000 by 8,600 pixels. That's huge. This original 1,700 or 2307 pixels is ideal. So I'm going to scale this back, and it's going to be a lot smaller than I'd like because it's a huge map. If the map was smaller, we can have a larger pixel size output, but this thing is mammoth. So if we want to keep this file size down, see the tile width is 86 by 123. That's pretty big. So that's 86 wide, 123 squares tall. Most battle maps are around 30. So this kind of give you an idea of scale. So I'm going to go ahead and change the output size to like maybe 30 here, just so I have a smaller footprint. And now the output size is basically going to be, it's quite a bit smaller. So 3690 by 2580 instead of 6000 by whatever it was. So that's kind of a way to get an idea of what the map dimensions and the overall size output. I think that's a good happy medium. I could go down to 20, but then it gets way too fuzzy. So there's that compromise that you have to make when you're using this tool. So once I have that set, now I have to start making adjustments. So how this works is you start in the top left corner of a map. And what you're doing is you're not moving a grid, you're actually stretching the image behind the grid. So it can get a little confusing at first because you think you're adjusting the grid. Well, what you're actually doing is adjusting the picture within the grid so that it will line up. And that's really where the confusion can come in. So you have some buttons over here. You can move the grid initially if you want to. But what you're going to end up doing is just chasing this thing, and you don't want to do that. So you already defined the grid size, and right now it's set at 20 by 19. So you can already see that the height is 20 and the width the height is 19, the width is 20. So that's already problematic. It should be square. So the next thing here is kind of picking a spot where you're working from. So I said this little island here. So it's off a little bit already. So I might move the grid. Let's see what happens. Yeah, so that's a little closer to center. And then I might move it up a hair. And that's really where you want to be. We'll say this square right here is our point of reference. So that's really where you want to be when you first start. But as you can see, as you move back out, so let me use this. I mean, it's way off. The further you get from that point all the way out here, it gets really ridiculous. And it's not even lined up at all. It's way off. So what you're going to be doing is effectively stretching this image in the background to fit the grid. You're not fitting the grid to the map. So this red grid here is your guide, and what you're doing is actually stretching the image in increments. So I'm going to take this and zoom in with the zoom keys up here. So I think 400% is a good happy medium there. And what you'll do is start off in whatever corner you chose as your point of reference and move over a little bit. So let's say over here, you can see it's almost off by half a square. So what I'm going to do is kind of center over, and I'm not going too far over, just like maybe in the middle at the most, and then adjusting from there. So I'm going to go in to 800%. And then I'm going to scroll to that area again so I can actually see what I'm doing. And what you'll notice here is here's all the lines. They're not lined up at all. So what I want to do is take the first direction. So we're going to work on the width. We don't worry about the height yet. So just worry about the width. So from left to right. So what we're going to do is adjust these by using these little adjustments. So you have 1/8, 1/6, and then 1 pixel, which doesn't really do much. So the 1/8 and the 1/6, you're going to be playing with those until you get it right, or until it gets closer. So 1/8 is actually a lot less movement than 1/6. So just remember these are fractions. So I got confused on that. I forgot about fractions. The bigger they are, the smaller they are. So just remember that. Anyway, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically back this off and kind of move it back. So I have the negative value. So I'm moving that. So that's pretty close. That's exactly what I want. And what you'll see though is as you move further away from where you started, it's going to go off again. So you want to move the map over a little, and then you're going to play around with this section, and you're kind of like, maybe a third of the map you're just going to be doing in sections. Hey, River the Bard, how's it going? So basically, you're going to be taking these images and shifting them over a little so that it will start lining up, and it's actually stretching the canvas, not these squares so much. So it kind of just gives you an idea. So now I'm going to go back and maybe a 1/6, and then go over an 1/8. And you're just going to keep playing with these, going back and forth until you get what you're after. So I'm going to go back to, so smaller increment is 1/8. I'm going to go back. So you just got to keep playing with it. Oops, I did it again. So like I said, you got to be careful with that zoom feature. And you can lock these, I believe, but I haven't found the right solution for that. So basically, you're going to work from one side to the other, and you're going to keep playing around. You don't worry about the up and down right now. We're just going to worry about left to right. So we want all of these squares to line up as we go further away from our center. So over here it looks good, but as you get further away, it gets worse. So I'm going to come over a little bit and play around with the settings using these plus and minus symbols here for just the width. So I'm going to go back a little, then go forward, then come back. You'll start to notice that there'll be a pattern where you'll end up being quite well just lurking for now while working on a project. Oh, cool. Yep. And I'm just kind of working and re-exploring this MapAlign. I haven't used this tool in a long time, but it comes in handy when you got a real pesky map that doesn't want to cooperate. So right now we're just trying to adjust for the left and right, or the width. And we're stretching the map so that it actually will fit the grid. So you just keep playing with these settings until you get what you're after. And you might have to hit plus or minus a few times to get what you're going for. But see, I'm getting closer. So you just keep doing these minuses and pluses and, until you actually get close to what you want. So that's even closer. I mean, it's getting there, but you have to play around with it. You have to be patient. You have to kind of get an idea of what, oops, I was going for height. Oops, wrong button. Let's see. So that We're just going to keep playing with these until we get close to where we want it to go. All right, so we're getting there. So this is almost square here, except for the height, and we're not going to worry about that. We're just worried about the left and the right. So I'm going to scroll over a little bit more and see how we're doing over here. And it looks pretty, let's go all the way to the other side. So yeah, so it's off a little bit here, which isn't too bad. I can probably play with that. So it's off by, you know, like half a pixel over here. So I'm just going to go and see if I can fix any of this. And it doesn't really break what you fixed before, but it gets a little bit more fiddly when you're trying to fine tune it from here. And it can get a little annoying, but with time and patience, you'll get it. It's not going to be that bad. I think I had it pretty close. I think I'm kind of playing with fire now. Yeah, it's kind of close. I mean, it's close enough. It's centered to the point where I can live with it. It doesn't have to be perfect. I mean, you got to think about it. You're stretching this map. This is MapAlign. It's actually on the Fantasy Grounds forum. So if you're a Fantasy Grounds user and you want to use this free tool, it's on the actual Fantasy Grounds forum. So just search for MapAlign plus Fantasy Grounds and it'll take you to the thread. I actually have a link here for that, and I'll actually add that to the links at the end. But essentially, it's just a tool that lets you stretch the image. And right now, I'm only working from left to right. I'm not worried about the height yet. And it looks like it's getting close, like these lines are starting to line up. And all I'm doing is playing with the width in pixels. And I mean, these are very incremental, so it could, you know, it could take a bit to get this to line up. But I'm just kind of playing with the sizes and shifting the map around. So you might have to go plus over here and then minus over here, but eventually you'll get to the point where these red lines will start lining up with the other line. So it's really helpful when you have a tool like this and you have a real finicky map. The idea, though, really, honestly, is to get good maps from good sources, but not everyone has that luxury. So this is a way to kind of work around it. This has actually been done before. Zacchaeus did a video a few years ago. So if you like his style of teaching better, he has a video. It's also linked in the same thread where the file is. It doesn't work for Macs, I don't think, and Linux, so it's just only PC. So sorry about that. I don't have any control over that. But nonetheless, I'm kind of working this back and forth and making adjustments. And just remember, 1/8 is a lot less than 1/6 in this case for pixel sizes. So I'm just kind of going plus and minus, and you know, until I get to where the actual grid lines up and it you know looks good, and it's actually getting better. And all I'm doing is playing with the width and the different in pixels. So it's kind of a crapshoot initially until you get used to the tool. But you'll start finding that you hit plus up here and then minus over here and then minus over there and plus up there. I mean, it starts getting to the point where you can kind of figure out what it's going to do. So just like I said, it's a little fiddling around, but it overall it works. So 1/8 is a bigger adjustment, or a smaller adjustment, excuse me, than the 1/6. So just remember that. Yeah, I'm getting there. So it's getting to the point where the grid will eventually kind of nest itself in the right spot where you want it, and it will actually help you. Then when you go to export it, you can tell it to keep the red lines, or you could tell it not to. And then you can also, if you have a map that doesn't already have a grid, you can add this red grid. You can change the color too. I kind of like the red because it kind of stands out, contrasts with the rest of it, but that's just me. All right, so we're getting closer. So we'll see what happens. So yeah, I can already tell. So don't go past 800%, like I was saying earlier. You go to that 1600% where it's super zoomed in, it's going to crawl on you, depending on your computer too. But so I have it at 30 output, so that's 30 pixels per inch. And then right now I'm only working on the width, so I don't want to mess with the height just yet. So I'm just kind of going back and forth and adjusting as I see that I may, end up to the point where I'm driving myself crazy doing this. But it is helpful to fix maps. It will get to the point where, you might want to give up, but honestly, it's just a matter of patience and taking your time with it. Okay, so we're actually kind of getting there, but I notice it's getting wider. So I want to back that off some. So let me try that. Yeah, so it's getting a little better. So I'll move over to another section here. Maybe I went too far over. Yeah, so these are way off. So this is what I'm saying. You have to work from one side to the other and then kind of work over. Otherwise, oops, I'm messing with the height again. Otherwise, it's going to make it a nightmare. Let's try that. Nope. So that's getting closer. But basically, you can see this line will these things will start to line up after a while. And then you just move it over some, and you'll end up finding that you'll have all these grids lined up from left to right. So that's basically how you can adjust these. So I'm gonna keep playing with it till I get closer to what I want. So yeah, so that one's lining up pretty good. So I'm gonna move over again just a little, and see these are way off too. So I wanna see what we got here. Let's try that. So what I find is usually you're adding and then taking away in smaller numbers or larger numbers, depends on which direction you're going. But what you'll notice after a while is that, oops, I keep messing with the height. Okay, so we're getting closer. Like it's lining up as we adjust this, which is good. Let me see if I can bring this over. Yeah, see, now that's too small. So you'll get to the point where you'll start getting used to what the actual adjustments are. And it can be a real bear at first. Yep. So that's not what I wanted, but I do want that. There we go. So after a while, you'll get to the point where these grid lines will line up for you. And you just keep coming across here, checking. It looks like I got it this time. So yeah, so looks pretty close. I don't think I'm going to play with the left and right anymore. Now I'm going to do the height. So this is another direction. So I'm all the way up on the top left corner. This is my reference point. Essentially, this is where I drew the square initially. So I'm going to play now with the width and the height. So I want to go with maybe a 1/8 increment. Do that again. Okay, and then maybe go up a 1/6. Okay, and go up an 1/8. Yep, we're getting there. All right, so that's pretty close on the height. But what you want to do is come down about halfway or so. Yeah, see, it's off over here. So all we're doing is stretching out the different sections of the map just so it kind of lines up with a real grid. So again, I'm going to come down. I'm just going to adjust just an 1/8 here. Nope, wrong direction. Okay, that's pretty close there. And again, I'm going to come down to another point in the map, and let's take a look at how these look as we go further away from center. I'm almost going to say that's good. I don't think I want to mess too much more with it. I'll go up to 800%. and scroll down and see where we're at there. Yeah, I think I can live with that. That's close enough. I mean, it is off down here. Maybe I can adjust a little bit. What ends up happening though is if you try to get too perfect, you're going to spend all day doing this. So, yeah, so you can see this little gap here. It's off quite a bit here. So maybe if I go down an eighth, nope, maybe up, and then go down a sixth. Yeah, see what ends up happening is you just yeah, it can really be aggravating if you try to get too perfect, because then it's just gonna give you issues like I was having earlier. So just play around with it with the plus and minuses on these 1/6 and 1/8 until you get to the point where you're close enough, and then move on to the other direction. Because if you try to do it too perfectly like I am, this is what you're going to get. You're going to be really pissed off after a while. So just try to go with, getting close enough. Yeah, so it's getting to the point where it's not worth, messing with. Yeah, see, now I'm just throwing myself way off. Let's see, let's go back. Let's see. You don't want to move the grid, by the way, once you start adjusting, because it'll screw up everything. So you want to try to set the grid and then work with what you have and start from one corner and work your way outward. That's kind of how this works. Otherwise, you're going to go nuts. Just forewarning you. This can be very, very time consuming if you try to be perfect. And that's exactly what's happening to me right now. So with that in mind, pick your battles, because this is not fun if you're in a hurry, or if you're not a patient person, you're going to get pissed. So I'm just letting you know that because I'm getting there. Okay, so this is not bad. I mean, I think that looks a lot better. I mean, it's off up here a little bit. I mean, you actually come in here. See, this is not what you want, in regards to the grid, because it's way off over here. So I'm going to zoom back in and kind of take a look at that, see what I need to adjust. So you don't want to go from one corner to the next, because that's where it gets really difficult to adjust for it. But you do want to come over maybe a third of the way or half of the way and zoom in on a section that you can really see and play with it until you get closer to your goal. So let me come down here and adjust these. So these height and widths are way off. So let me look at that. So we're close there. Let's go back to where I had it. Let's go to 1/8 and then 1/6. Yeah, so you're gonna have fun with this. Let me tell you, it can get kind of aggravating. So over here they're off quite a bit. Let me zoom in over there, see if I can fix that part. So we're only adjusting the top and bottom. We're not going left to right. So not unless you're like me and accidentally hit the wrong button. Let's see. So like that. Yeah, it's getting there. Let's try that. And then back it off a hair. Yeah, we're getting there. And I've said that like 100 times. Oh, we're there. We're almost there. Yeah, we're there. Let's see. So plus on the 1/6 and then minus on 1/8. So let's see. So maybe that and that. No, I want to go up and then subtract. Yeah, so it's still not quite tall enough. So I'm going to go with an extra height and then maybe play with the position a little bit. Yep, it's definitely a labor of love when you're doing this. Not always fun. So when you get practice with this tool and you start understanding what the adjustments do, it's quick. when you don't use it enough, like myself, you kind of forget how this goes. So here we go. That's getting closer. Now I want to come back down here, see what we got. So yeah, these are off over here. So I'm going to subtract an 1/8 and then come up a 1/6 and then go down 1/8. So you're playing with these little fine adjustments, and it, like I said, it can be annoying. So that looks too tall. So let me bring that up. Okay, so that, we're getting there. So all you're doing really is you're stretching the image behind the grid, so to speak, but it's also kind of sizing this adjustment is what the grid is doing here. So it really helps when you have a map that's distorted. So that's another topic. Like when you get maps from third parties, quite often they're not set up for virtual tabletop, and that's why I'm having to fight these, because the maps themselves were made for like print. They weren't really made for virtual tabletop. So that's unfortunate, but that's just how it goes. So now I'm just kind of adjusting for height. That's getting there, so we're close. Let's see what happens down here, though. Yeah, so it's off down here. So you're going to have to adjust kind of in sections, and that will help you, fix some of these anomalies that you might come across. You'll have a lot less of this, though, if you actually get a map that was made for virtual tabletop and not just, given to you from a third-party content that doesn't really support VTTs. They're getting better, though. I want to say that a lot of the publishers, the third-party publishers, are definitely improving. They're realizing that their maps kind of suck for this, so they've asked their artists to kind of step their game up and actually make the maps a little bit more virtual tabletop friendly. As you're going to find that there are tons of cool maps, but they're not necessarily made for this. So that's when it gets kind of dicey. Let's see. Go up a 6, go down. So I'm playing with these positive and negative values on the tile height. So I'm trying to get it lined up, and it's been a real bugger. I did this the other day. I didn't have any problems, so I must be holding my mouth wrong or something. I don't know what I'm doing. Okay, so that's kind of close up here, but then it gets broken over here. So you're going to see this quite a bit. Let me see if I can fix that. Getting there. So there, we want to go down 1/6 and then go up an 1/8. Yeah, not quite. Okay, that's kind of close there. But eventually, you'll work it out to where the map is going to look a lot better. And it's already better. I mean, when I first started this, it was way off. It's just off down in this zone down here, so I might work this area. Let's go to 200%. And I'm going to scroll over. Now, this is the far extreme from the starting point. So this doesn't look too bad. It's getting there. Yeah, so I'll zoom in to maybe 400. But see, on here, it's horrible. I mean, this is way off. So again, we're still just working on the height. Yeah, we're getting kind of far. from the center. Okay, so yeah, it's pretty good. I mean, it's better than it was. Yeah, so like I said, you can't be 100% perfect. I mean, if you are, you're lucky. But essentially, the output, now that I have it at 30 pixels per inch, it's going to look like, it's going to make the output a little bit less. So if you have more pixels per inch, the output file size is going to be bigger. So that's another thing you have to balance in between what you're wanting and what your needs are. But see, you can see this big gap here. It's off quite a bit. So this is where it kind of takes a little time to get used to how the tool works and how it stretches. So it looks good up here, but then when you come down here, it's not good there. So you're kind of playing around with, you know, what areas you're adjusting, and then you're kind of stretching the map and making it more square again, trying to work out the wrinkles. But I can see here that these height and width are quite different. So that's where a lot of the problem is with this. So now if I go up to where it says square, if I go up to 19, it should be a little bit closer when it comes to the actual number up there. So we're getting closer to the actual height. So let's see what we got. So come down a little bit, go up a little, and then come down, go up. There we go. So you can see these numbers now match, and the squares are starting to match. So that's another guide that you can use to help you your input. So that kind of helps straighten that out, because I had it way off. Like one side was, it was basically a rectangle instead of a square. So that's pretty good. It's lined up to where I want. Now you have an option to export it. You can change background color. You can grid added to image on save. If you hit this plus button, it'll add the red grid. I opted to do so I can see it in contrast to the black grid that was already painted underneath. But you can actually change that to where it's not. And then you could just use the Fantasy Grounds grid on top of it. So once I do that, I hit File, Save. And it usually saves in the same folder that you worked on, but I'm going to just call this, I'll just call this B, just so I know what map it is. And this is actually the folder that on Fantasy Grounds that I'm working in. So you want to be careful with that. Make sure you name them aptly. So I'm going to hit save, bring up Fantasy Grounds. And like I said earlier, this is what you'll end up with once you have it. So I have the Fantasy Grounds grid on top, and now the grids line up, whereas before it was a nightmare. Let's see, images. Yes, MapAlign, exactly. And the only reason I'm doing this, because it's been a while since anyone visited this. Like I said, Zacchaeus was the master at this. He knows how to do it in a lickety split, but it essentially it helps everyone. You know, if you got some funky maps, that's just definitely something to use. But one of the things I put in the in my notes here is that you try to choose maps that don't have pre-existing grids. This helps to ensure that they fit seamlessly into the Fantasy Grounds grid system. So you would opt for maps that don't have pre-existing grids. But if you include a map set that has a grid baked into it, more than likely it's gonna be square. But if you're downloading this off the internet randomly, you're probably gonna have problems. So if you use like map tile packs or create your own maps, you have more control. So be cautious when downloading maps online. Many maps available online may not be designated for virtual tabletop use. They may be stretched, distorted, converted, compressed, or resized to fit a particular website or mobile view. Therefore, avoid relying on random maps found online, especially those not intended for distribution or virtual tabletop platforms. Doesn't mean don't do it. It just means, expect a fight, if you're going to. Understand the map scale. So that's what I was talking about earlier, is this output. This is 2640 by 3570 pixels. That's pretty good sized map in Fantasy Grounds dimensionally. So that's 88 tiles wide and 119 tall. So that's huge. Most battle maps are between 20 and 30. You might get one that's 40 in square. So this map is like 2 or 3 times the size it should be for a virtual tabletop. It's really not ideal in Fantasy Grounds to have huge whopping maps like this, but you don't have a choice with some of this official content. So it really just depends on what your needs are. But understanding the pixels per inch, like this is 30, so it's about half of what normally Fantasy Grounds would use. They usually use 50. But if you go any lower than 30, it gets so blurry that it's like ugly, So, if you can keep the pixels per inch closer to 100 and the map output size is not huge, that's a good thing. That means the map is good dimensionally and the quality is good. So let me see. So use MapAlign for problematic maps. That's kind of what we're doing here. If you must work with a difficult map, consider using MapAlign to help stretch and square the image for better grid application in Fantasy Grounds Unity. So I'm going to provide a link for that in the when the video's over. And then there is a note here about sourcing maps from reputable sources. So to ensure compatibility with Fantasy Grounds Unity, seek maps from reliable sources. Consider subscribing to the Fantasy Grounds Art Pack, which gives you a range of a bunch of maps that are already pre-made and also assets. So you can create your own. Alternatively, if you don't like using that, you can use third-party tools like ArcandForge, Dungeon Draft, Dungeon Fog to generate your own versions or remakes of existing maps or custom content. So if you do that, you won't have to be fiddling around so much with it, like with this MapAlign. But that tool is free on the Fantasy Grounds forums. And like I said, once you get used to how it works, it's not too bad. But what you're going to end up with is, if you use a bunch of maps from, like, official maps from Wizards of the Coast, they're not made for virtual tabletop, so you might have to do some finagling here. But hopefully that helps you guys. Like I said, the resources will be after the video. I'm going to go do some chores. You guys take care. Have a great